Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some ProRevenge. Our first story today comes to us from Shell Loser 42. Stealing my girlfriend's Wi-Fi strained or ended their relationship. Let's jump right in. Backstory. After my girlfriend moved to her new apartment closer to both her sister and myself, she obviously wanted internet. Although she isn't fully tech savvy, she does know her basics, and thus explicitly asked the provider if she should be worried about admin kind of Wi-Fi protection. She was assured that it was all fully safe out of the box, no admin/admin. In fact, just press a button to connect her laptop and her Wi-Fi network would be fully secured. The incident. So a few months or years later, my girlfriend started to notice that her internet speed went down. This became very apparent while video chatting with some of her family members in Japan. Like I said, my girlfriend knows her basics, so she knew that it didn't have to be the internet connection itself, it could also be her laptop, or maybe the network cables had eroded due to age. She decided to cover as many options as possible before contacting her ISP support desk. So she asked me to help. I'm a geek and I worked within the field of ICT for over 30 years now, mostly as systems administrator, but also as IT manager or co-manager, during which I'd still try to keep tabs with my colleagues and even cover shifts if the need arose. So visiting my girlfriend and getting to show off my elite IT skills, it took me a moment, but I discovered the issue. Someone was leeching off her Wi-Fi. Technically, the ISP support staff were right. This wasn't an admin kind of thing anymore. It was completely randomized. Sorta. You see, on their routers, the Wi-Fi password was the same as the random SSID, aka the network name. What the F? I was quite angry at both this incompetence as well as the blatant disrespect for my girlfriend's privacy. Maybe a bit too much, but yeah. Sure, for some people this is only about getting internet. But what many people overlook is that such leechers also gain access to your private network. So basically they could access any public Windows or Mac shares you may have active, not to mention any other connected devices. Fortunately, my girlfriend knew her basics, as I mentioned earlier, but I was still angry. The revenge. So I suggested something I had done earlier. Let's replace this POS router for a professional device. In specific, the same kind of Zycel router that I used at my home so that we could set up a secured VPN between ourselves and get some other nice features as well, like a private VoIP connection. She agreed, so we bought her a new router together. We're talking professional gear here. These things cost about as much as a high-end smartphone, so obviously we were going to split the cost, considering that a mid-level could also have helped her out. Now, even though I consider her previous router a POS, I still have to admit that it did provide some very useful features, like a syslog service. It could also use USB storage, so I turned on Wi-Fi logging, plugged in a large USB memory stick, and then we waited for the new router to arrive. Then I got to work. First, I set up my girlfriend with a nice hidden Wi-Fi network so that no one could easily find it. Next, we set up a much better security scheme, and then it was time to get even with the lowlifes. I set up a second Wi-Fi network, which was completely the same as the previous one, but this time I throttled it down a bit so that it couldn't usurp the full bandwidth. Then I added some specific DNS overrides. DNS is a service on the internet which translates names into IP addresses, which is what your computer needs to connect to something. You may care about Reddit.com. All your PC cares about are the associated IP addresses. Thing is, this service can be easily overridden. And I have studied the logs, so I knew exactly what sites the lowlifes visited the most. So from now on, going to banka.nl using this router would point your browser to a hardcore, not very legal, gay adult material website. Not very legal as in, the site didn't bother asking for consent first, but got you some close-up screenshots right away. Then it was time for bankb.nl. I redirected that one to a shady hot scissors lesbian website. I also noticed that a certain web shop was sporadically used by the leechers, so I decided to redirect that one to a relationship counseling website. When you think your spouse is cheating on you, come to us. It was around that time when I noticed that my girlfriend's router was using more modern firmware than I had on my router. This one also provided web redirection services. Companies can use this to redirect specific websites based on their URL to a local or remote web page. So say you don't want your staff to use social media, then you could just tell the router to redirect, say, facebook.com to a local web page which explained the no social media allowed policy. Much to my delight, this service also supported a randomized trigger. See, I still remembered a website from the early days of the internet, something about a goat from Sweden, which was so horrible that it became a meme on its own. Seriously, a look at that picture could never be undone anymore. There's a reason I still remember the horror now, an easy 30 years later. So I looked for and found a replacement, and then happily added that to the randomized redirection service. So every once in a while the leechers would open their favorite websites, and no matter whatever kind of site they asked for, they'd always end up with something completely and utterly disgusting on their screen. Then we waited. I need to point out that my girlfriend did not fully agree with some of my actions, especially when she learned of the aftermath, but we never had an argument over this because she could also understand my point of view. Don't mess with my girlfriend. And she agrees that if you trespass, even in the digital world, then all bets are off and you lost your rights to a civil solution. Don't mess with a geek, okay? The aftermath. One day, my girlfriend got home from work and noticed a huge moving van outside. She gave it no further mind, but when she got to her front door, she noticed that her neighbor 2 doors over was moving out. She brought this up with her direct in-between neighbor a few days later, and as it turns out, things completely exploded over there. The shouting and accusations could even be heard through the walls. Seems the pair got into huge arguments about their rather explicit choice of websites, and once the deed was done, there was no room left for any kind of reasoning. One of the two even accused the other for hacking the internet because it was only after the first fallout that those goating pictures started to show up. As far as we know, they broke up. For the record, I regret nothing. I did remove the SSID for obvious reasons and also reset the DNS and forwarding sections, and now things are back to normal. More importantly, my girlfriend is still very happy with the router and the extra services to this very same day of writing. She's working her way up as a 3D artist, and the knowledge that all her work will be fully kept safe after she copies her projects onto my NAS is a deal breaker for her. Seriously, you guys, always remember that when you use someone else's internet connection, this includes free services, then you're fully relying on their goodwill. Such services could be easily abused as well, either through pranking like I did or worse. How about I redirect your bank request to a fake login page so that I can store and/or abuse your data? Thanks for reading. Well, this is an interesting one because you have to be a special kind of stupid to not realize that somebody's screwing around with you when your bank site goes to adult material, especially if you're knowingly leeching internet service off of somebody else that you're not paying for. Do me a quick favor and take a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're actually not subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Our next story today comes to us from Chuck It Bucket. So I recently had a run-in with UPS. Let's jump right in. I posted this to ProRevenge, but it got removed and I was told to post it here. Enjoy. UPS smashed a nearly new MacBook that I sent with them. I asked them nicely to pay me back for it, and they arsed about, blaming me, blaming my packaging, saying it was impossible they damaged it, etc. I was able to prove my packaging was flawless and get a statement from the Apple shop that I took it to say that it was damage caused by being dropped or thrown. I could also prove it worked when I sent it. They weren't interested and messed me about for weeks, sending me from pillar to post, even threatening to make me pay interest on custom charges, which I wasn't liable for as the laptop was smashed on arrival and thus worthless at import. I took it to small claims. They hired a lawyer who sent me letters stating they contested it and would go for full fees, etc. if I lost. I went for it anyway. I did law stuff at university, so I knew the basics and I thought my case was pretty clear cut. I won my cost back plus extra plus interest. They ignored the court order and did not pay. Now, this laptop was originally being sent to my beloved mother-in-law. She asked me to help her with the problem as UPS was also seriously harassing her for the customs fees. However, very unexpectedly, before I could resolve it, she passed away. It was the last thing she ever asked me to do for her. I love that woman more than pretty much any human on this planet. She was my mother, my best friend, and my mentor. Taking down UPS was now my personal vendetta. I researched my options. I could have taken the usual, more conservative legal routes to reclaim my money, but no, F them. I don't care about the money anymore. I want revenge. I want drama. I want karmic justice. I went to the high court. I got a writ of control. I, of course, added on more fees and more interest. I then hired the most aggressive bailiff firm in London. I trusted that the crappy processes and attitude of UPS to mean that they would ignore the letters and actually get a visit. They did. The bailiffs rock up at UPS headquarters and explain the situation. UPS refuses to pay, so the bailiffs start listing goods. Security tries to make them leave. The office manager tries to bully them out. Obviously, no craps are given by the bailiffs, and they crack on with their jobs. I wasn't allowed the body cam footage, but they did send me a detailed report. The final conclusion is copied from it below. Calls were then made to the accounts manager, who arrived in a hurry. As no payment was forthcoming from them, the agent again explained the removal process and costs involved and called the office for approval to begin removals. The agent began to seize assets. The finance director then arrived on the scene. He was not at all happy about the attendance, but ultimately agreed to pay a voluntary payment in full from his personal account in order to stop the removal. I know it's a drop in the ocean to UPS, but I got more than double what I originally asked for to replace the laptop. They would have had to pay even more on top in fees to the bailiffs. I reckon it cost them at least 3 times more than the original claim in the end, but mostly, I just enjoy the mental image of the flustered finance director and his impotent rage having to pay his own money to stop the heavies from taking the desktop computers and fancy pot plants and things out of their swanky head office lobby. Well, OP, I honestly think if your package had been sent in an explosion-proof container, they still would have tried to say that it was a problem with the packaging. I think a lot of companies just bank on customers really not knowing what to do in this situation or not having the means to take the big company to court. Our last story today comes to us from Jam Shack. Don't F with the valets. Let's jump right in. For some backstory, I worked as a valet in a small coastal city in college, and the restaurants I worked for were very popular for both locals and tourists. We'd generally be busy year-round, but as the restaurants are both waterfront, spring, summer, and early fall are our peak seasons per se. The downside to these restaurants is that parking can be a huge pain in the butt. Combined, the restaurants can seat around 400 people at any given time, and can usually turn over about 2,500 seats on a busy weekend. But the parking lot can only hold about 60 to 70 cars at a time, which isn't much at all. That's why I, the valet, am there. We have about 25 to 30 designated valet spots, used to have double that amount, but I digress, and are really good about utilizing all of them efficiently, so we can park as many cars as possible, thus getting as many tips as possible. Being that the valet spots are kind of in a weird spot, but really close to the restaurants and our stand, and there aren't any signs that say valet only, we usually show up a bit early and cone the spots off so people know they aren't for self-parking. Now, most people see the cones and recognize those spots are pretty clearly not available, but some people are so dumb and such buttholes that they will move the cones and park in our spots anyway. Disclaimer, there is a parking garage for overflow parking, but people don't particularly like using it. People do this pretty regularly, and we're usually pretty cool about it. One of the valets will normally just walk up to them as they're parking and tell them that the spot is reserved for valet, and they'll usually comply. Obviously, this was not the case yesterday, or I wouldn't be writing this right now. While we were in full swing last night, some douchebag is not 100 feet from me moving a cone so he can try to sneakily take one of our spots. I was talking to a customer, so I wasn't able to immediately go tell him not to park there. After finishing up talking, I went over to douche as he was getting out of his car, and immediately, I knew I had encountered this exact guy trying to do this crap before. After this encounter, I knew revenge was going to be necessary. Our conversation went as follows. Hey man, I'm sorry, but these spots are for valet only. That's why we have the cone set up. If you'd like to self-park, you can park in this main lot, pointing to the full lot, or in the parking garage. But there's nowhere to effing park in that lot, and I don't want to park in the parking garage. You guys always do this crap to me. So if I valeted, I could just park here? That's BS, bro. I'm parking here whether you like it or not. I was pretty taken aback, and basically just walked away, not wanting to get into a fight over a parking spot. I knew it was time this guy learned his lesson. Now, I don't have the authority to tow his car or give him a boot, and I wouldn't anyways because I'm not a butthole, but my power is in pure number of cars I have access to. Luckily, he did this at about 8 p.m. I contractually only have to be there until 10 p.m., at which time I can park the remaining cars in certain places and then leave the keys with the bartenders inside. Most nights I would stay to get the tips, but tonight I was dropping keys. Conveniently, Douche had parked in the area where we moved cars to before we dropped the keys. My plan: use the valeted cars to block Douche in, and then leave him with having no way of leaving until the cars around him left. There was one car that would be particularly important, the one directly in front of him. I had a special car for that spot. It was owned by a restaurant employee that I knew wouldn't be off until 2 a.m. Perfect. I maneuvered all the cars around him in a way that didn't make me look like I was intentionally blocking him, but in a way that made it look like I had no other choice. Everything fell into place perfectly, and I could already feel a justice chub starting to form. I went inside to drop the keys and explain to the restaurant manager what happened and my revenge. She loves us and said she'd 100% have our backs, which I figured she would. I told her to text me and tell me how everything played out. This is the text I received last night around 11 p.m. The guy just came up to me pissed. He said there was a car blocking him from leaving and that it needed to be moved immediately so he could leave. I tried to explain that you guys have to put cars there before you leave and that you even told him not to park there. I guess that made him mad, so he started raising his voice at me. Bar manager saw and told me that he had been drinking for a while, which I assumed from the beginning. I told him that I couldn't, for liability reasons, allow him to drive home since he had been drinking. He got really pissed because he lives 40 minutes drive away, but ended up taking an expensive Uber home. She told me she slipped in the argument that he was going to get another ride, whether he liked it or not. Gotta be honest, OP, I think in this case you might have actually saved a life that night, because every time you stop a drunk driver from getting behind the wheel, you risk saving a family from tragedy. Check out all 3 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.